All right, here we are for another series of Beyond the Book chapter conversations. And we've got Wendy Glass as our guest today. Wendy is a phenomenal professional in the human resource management area, and really looking forward to our conversation today about human resource management. So before we get too far, Wendy, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you're about, sort of your background as it pertains to HR.
Sure. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Wendy Glass. I've spent almost 2 decades in the HR profession. It's up until the last 3 years. It was in the healthcare space, but I started out in recruitment, was able to build my career up through executive leadership. And so about 3 years ago, well, 4 years ago, I decided to step away from corporate America and then started my own organization, Ignite Leadership and HR Group, where I get to really lean in as kind of a fractional CHRO and leadership coach. So that's what I get to spend my time doing. Other when I'm not there, I'm spending time with our future leaders.
I love that. It's so good. One of the things that we talk about in Foundations of Business and throughout this textbook, a lot of times we talk about people,
Mhm.
solving problems and helping people. And for whatever reason, obviously, when I think of HR, I certainly think about people. So I guess help the audience understand your thoughts as it HR problems and people and what that means to you.
Yeah, so this is I've obviously spent a lot of time in the profession, and so I would say, we talk about a lot of different business functional areas. I think HR is the most important, and it's because of the people. And I would be willing to probably debate anybody on that because the reality of it is no business can function without the people. And HR is kind of that they're the guardian of that, right? They're the guardian of the people who come and do the work, whether it's building a product, whether it's delivering a service, whether it's caring for patients in healthcare, whatever it may be. HR is kind of the guardians of the workforce that come and do the work, whatever the work is. And so I've actually had conversations with CEOs and said, it doesn't matter how much time or money you pour into other functional areas of your business. If you don't have your people pillar right, you're not going to be successful. So to me and there's lots of problems that people in HR have to deal with, whether it's related to, scaling for growth, whether it's dealing with, low performers that are pulling the team down, whether it's turnover, there's, leadership development. There's so many things that go into HR, but yeah, it's all around the people.
Yeah. No, it's well said. And I like that term guardian. And we don't think about that, but certainly making sure people feel comfortable in their roles, and then that there's going to be conflict at some point, right? And so being able to do that. But it would be nice too to sort of ground us all in these essentials of HR management. And obviously we talk a lot about this in chapter 12,
Mm.
some of the things about, talent acquisition and training and development, retaining employees. We all know that those are great assets. What do you think are some of the core functions of HR today?
When I think about HR, I think about it as like the employee life cycle from the beginning, like the talent acquisition, the recruitment piece. How do you make sure from the very beginning that you are recruiting the right talent to fill the roles that you need? And there's lots of things that go into that. Is your job description proper? Is it right? Does it reflect what you actually need? Is your job posting reflective of what you're looking for? Do you have a good interview process to make sure that you're hiring for fit and not just filling roles with warm bodies? That's the very first step of that employee life cycle. Then once you get them on, it's truly that development and investment, the onboarding piece, making sure that we're welcoming people and that they feel welcome. We know from data that employees, if they do not feel welcomed, you're at much higher risk of losing them within the first 90 days, which is not
Mhm.
only difficult on your operations, it's costly. It can be very costly. So from there, it's performance management. So you go from talent acquisition to kind of that, onboarding, then performance management. And how do you make sure that people know what's expected of them and that they're doing it properly? What kind of feedback are you giving them on a regular basis? Sometimes we talk about performance management and you think about annual evaluations. This is not my phrase. It come from Jason Dorsey, who's the CEO for the Center for Generational Kinetics. But if you only give performance feedback, and if you only do it as a once a year checkbox, you might as well call it an exit interview. Yeah, and I love that concept because like people need that feedback. It's, total rewards. Total rewards includes both compensation and benefits that we offer. It's the leadership development piece. And I'm missing, there's kind of six pillars that I think kind of fall into that HR category, but you think about it's just the whole employee life cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too because it's interesting in class a lot of times I'll say how many of you students really want to go into HR and and choose this function, and very few hands, if any hands, go up. But then you sort of rephrase the question of how many of you want to lead people? How many of you want to grow and become part of the C-suite? And of course many hands go up. Well, guess what? Now you are in HR, right? Managing people and looking at that. Now in chapter 8 of the textbook, we do a lot about, strategic vision and mission statement and, kind of where companies want to go in the future. How does HR sort of align and what type of functions do that alignment for that future growth and in some cases, the aspirational piece?
So you are talking my language. It's interesting. I sometimes wonder, and I saw that too, right? When I asked my students, who wants to go into HR? I see very few responses. I think part of it is it stems from I don't think that everyone fully understands what HR does. I think in a lot of ways we think about, old school personnel and it's a transactional kind of role. And I would say probably 20 or so years ago, it probably was, but today it's not. And as a matter of fact, throughout my career, my leadership journey within corporate America, I was in the C-suite. I was on the org chart. I was on the
Yeah.
same level with all of the other CXOs besides the CEO. And so, thinking about it more broadly, but then from there, you think about HR. Of course, we have to have people who can update addresses and enter direct deposits, but that's not strategic HR at all. And for me, one of the priorities I always had was getting to know the business and getting to know the operational side of the business because you cannot support a business as an HR professional if you don't understand what they're doing. And so I started really had a little bit of a shift of mindset. And instead of calling myself HR, I thought about myself through the lens of the people operations leader. If you
Like
think about it through that lens, it makes you really start to see the impact you can have. But I haven't fully answered your question. So when you look at it through that lens, then you start to say, okay, these are our operational goals. This is our, strategy as an organization. Then the HR professional comes in and says, how do I start to align our talent agenda to support and help execute our strategic plan? Going back to what I said at the beginning, you're not going to be successful if you don't take care of your people.
No, I think that, and what's interesting too, Wendy, you bring up an excellent point, is over the last 10 to 15 years, companies realize that people are assets now, right? And we do want to listen and learn. There's a voice now, there's a voice of the employee and there's a voice of culture, but who's the champion of that voice? And so there has to be this functional area that does it in a strategic way. And I think where that's HR. So what's interesting now, and I think it's something that students need to realize that research out there, 5 out of the top 25 emerging careers are HR related because companies see the value in that position. Again, it's not something we talk about, right? We know finance and wanting to go to Wall Street, or we talk about cyber and the future of cyber and, where it's entrepreneurship. But quite frankly, students should explore the careers in HR and things like that. Talking about technology, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how is technology like AI and automation, how is that changing HR?
So I've had, in the last couple of years, a lot of conversation around this, and I've heard some HR people say like we're going to get replaced, and I would say no, you're not. We can never forget that human resources starts with human, and there's this human component to HR. You've got to have that compassion and concern for the people, and I AI it doesn't have the emotion, right? Like, and I don't, you can't recreate that emotion, in my opinion. maybe someone brilliant went. I just don't see that it could ever happen. And then there's a special components, I think, of HR that really just require a different level of critical thinking compared to what you know about employment law or what you know about your own policies and what precedents you have set. And so AI, what I see, and honestly, even in my own business, I use it as like a companion to help me do things faster and better. But I don't see HR ever being replaced by AI because you can't replicate that emotion, and it starts with the human side, right?
Well, I think, and you brought it up earlier, I think some of those tactical things like, updating addresses and adding dependents to insurance and things like that, certainly I think, which quite honestly could be done in a self-service kind of mode,
Oh,
which would help,
absolutely.
in that regard, or maybe even on interview and interview preps. But I love the thought you got to care about the people, and that comes with empathy and listening and learning. And that has to be from a human standpoint.
Well, you think about the risks that are associated with HR too. I mean, you could Google and you could find bukus of organizations that have had to pay millions and millions and millions of dollars out because they did not take care of their people, whether it was discrimination or whatever it may be. And so, it comes down to like AI can be a really useful tool to help you do, and even things like I need a job description for X number, this position. You think about the amount of time it could reduce in trying to create it yourself. It gives you a starting point. That's why I call it kind of a companion. But you've got to have that human factor because it's too risky not to.
Yeah, well said. One of the other things that we're obviously seeing in society, especially here in North America, but quite honestly, we all do a lot of international stuff, is just mental health,
Mhm.
and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what companies are doing to support mental health and well-being in the workplace, because some companies offer mental health days or wellness stipends or these employee assistance programs, which a CFO might see as that's an expense, but in some cases, right, it's an investment or a mitigation strategy. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this, well-being in the workplace.
I think that it's critical to your success as an organization if you want to thrive because it's become as commonplace as having, reasonable work schedules. And we've seen really a transition with Gen Z. It's become common language. I need a mental health day. When I had first started my career, if I would have told or probably you, if we'd have told our boss I need a mental health day, I'm not sure it would have been well received. But it's continued growth and I think shifting in expectations as we have, Gen Z's our fastest emerging work generation in the workforce, our millennial groups that's important to them. And so I would say if organizations aren't getting on board, if they aren't realizing that wellness and mental well-being, if those are not viewed as critically important as your compensation, are you paying people to market? Do you offer, competitive benefits? Do you have a good work environment? You're going to start losing top talent. It has to be a strategic priority. It has to be.
Well, and then you start to efficiency, right? And we know that efficiency has a cost to it. And once cost increases, then our profitability erodes. So
Yeah,
excellent.
I read an article not too awfully long ago because companies are still trying to figure out what does that mean to be like an organization that promotes and supports well-being. And I think companies are starting to realize too, it's not just throwing more stuff at them to do. Well, let me give you this other class to go to, or let me do this. Growth and development's important, but that's not, it's just making it worse in terms of like having that workload and that burnout and that fatigue. And so I think we're going to continue to see this grow and evolve, but it's going to become as important in smart businesses. It's going to become as important as your comp structures.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like you said, when I first got into business, and as a male, we're not supposed to cry, we're not supposed to have
Right.
any emotions and all that. And one of the things I've noticed over the last 30 years is that's baloney, right?
Baloney.
Humans have emotions and humans need to express their emotions, whether it's male or female. And so I think leaders having that moment to give the space to allow that emotional part is so important.
Which is fundamentally is probably, in my opinion, as a strategic HR leader, is probably leadership and leadership development is probably one of the most critical parts of HR's responsibilities because it all starts with them. And I've seen this across every industry and every sector. We take high performing employees and we plop them into leadership titles and we don't teach them how to lead. And so, that's again another pillar of HR is that leadership development component and teaching them how do you, make people feel like they belong? How do you create an inclusive culture where people feel like, hey, I can be who I am here and I can be different from you and still be honored and respected for who I am. So
Well, so and it's a nice bridge to the next question I had, and it kind of goes to sort of your new role and your entrepreneurial and consulting piece is what skills should students develop if they're considering this HR as a career or even just leadership in general? What do you think are those skills that students need to think about now?
So that's a really big question because HR has as many different functional areas within it as business in general, right? So you can be a very outgoing and enjoy connecting and get into that talent acquisition space. You can love data and analytics and you don't really want to talk to people all day. Well, guess what? There's a place for you because organizations, particularly smart organizations, are realizing the importance of making data informed decisions as it relates to HR. I was speaking with a graduate student, Usha. I think she graduated actually in May, but she was in data analytics and through our conversation, she realized, hey, there could be a place for me in HR. Of course there can, because HR, particularly Fortune 500s and the big corporations, they have entire HR analytics teams. So I think it depends on what you think you want to do, but fundamentally it's developing that ability to critically think, not relying on AI or these devices to, answer the questions. You have to be able to critically think because you think about the risk that you're managing for your company as an HR professional. It's I would say don't count HR out because I could just off the top of my head probably rattle off 10 different functional areas within an HR department that you could perform. As a leader, I think that just gaining clarity around your purpose and your values, because really I call it values based leadership, right? You need to know what's important to you to help guide how you treat other people because your values are going to show up in how you behave as a leader. And I guess finally, these aren't great skills to say, right? I mean, it just depends. I'll just tell you, like, I have no desire to ever work in compensation. Wendy, math is a real problem. And I was very successful in HR, but I knew enough about compensation philosophy and methodology that I can do it. But I'm not the person that wants to sit in the back office and pull in survey reports and put it together. So it really just depends on kind of what functional area of HR you might want to go into. But I would say to any student, if you think you don't count it out, and if you think, wow, I didn't really think about HR beyond just, personnel kind of old school thinking, go and shadow. Find some HR teams that you can shadow with, reach out. I don't listen, I might get in trouble for saying this, but like see if Virginia Tech HR, it's a big department.
Yep.
Could you shadow a generalist? Could you shadow a business partner? Could you shadow someone who works in comp or in benefits to see, if there are other functional areas that you might really enjoy? Because at the end of the day, everything you do in HR is going to have a direct impact on the people that you support.
Yeah, well said. Interestingly, we do have the HR major in the Department of Management and the Pamplin College of Business, and it's still a very strong major. It's the oldest major within the department. We actually do have an internship program with Virginia Tech Division of HR, right?
Oh,
Because
good. I'm not gonna get in trouble for saying that, right?
no, absolutely not. It was a good plug, a very, very good plug. What would be a myth that we think of when it comes to HR that you would like to debunk?
The one that I worked so hard throughout my career to debunk is that the HR is like the HR police. I hate that mentality. And I'll never forget early in my career, I started at Curly Newer Valley, as a matter of fact. And you can probably, know me, so you know that like connection and relationships are important to me. But students watching this may not know me. So, no surprise, I get there. It's my first HR job. And one of the first things I start doing is going out into the department and just like talking to employees, going out into the units. And I was being looked at like I had three heads. And what I figured out was because there had been kind of this underlying current of HR not being connected to the people. And so maybe one of the biggest myths is if you think that you can go into HR and sit in a back office and not have to engage with people, that's probably one of the biggest. It is not a back office. You get called an overhead department, or we cost money, we don't make money. I would argue that too. Try operating without us. But yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, I don't know. There's probably one of the biggest myths in my mind is, and it's a barrier that I still work to break down, is that HR is just a transactional kind of function,
Yeah.
and continuing to push to be seen as like we're your strategic partner.
Yeah. And I think that bridges something you mentioned earlier, where you did have a seat at the table with the
Mhm.
C-suites. Because, full disclosure, when I first came into business 35 years ago, it's hard to believe, HR did not have a seat at the table. Absolutely not. They sort of, went up through the CFO or the COO, the Chief Operations Officer. But again, I think CEOs realized, and board of directors realized that, wait a minute, we don't want to get this filtered by other people. We want to hear directly from the voice of the employees, which I think, what would be an emerging trend that just, within HR or even in leadership in general, but what's an emerging trend that just excites Wendy every day?
Yeah, I think I hate to stay in that same vein, but it's that realization that you cannot execute your strategy without us. And so, it continues to be an emerging trend where you see HR as an important cog in your wheel of success, as you do finance, as you do marketing, as you do any other function of HR. Ron, I will never forget, I sat at the table from the time I entered my leadership career in HR, and it was in 2011. But unfortunately, listen, I was not unhappy the HCA stocks dropped, but it was when the money started being impacted and our stock price started going down, and what they were hearing, the board of directors, board of trustees, they were hearing, it's because you're not taking care of your people. Your turnover's too high. And that was, in a for-profit world, that was the pivotal moment that made executives from the company CEO down realize, like, we've got to do a better job. And so that was literally 10 years ago. It's not been that
Um,
long. And so we still have some that haven't quite gotten there. And so it continues to be a trend. And I think it will, until we acknowledge that a lot of our pain points are coming from a lack of focus on HR.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, people matter. It's interesting. I know, a lot of times that it's such a cliche, and a lot of CEOs get frustrated hearing that. But at the same time, I'll never forget, one of my favorite mentors and CEOs said, I want you to walk the floor. Salespeople, go walk the floor in
Yes.
manufacturing and say thank you. Have a moment of gratitude, because without the people on the floor, we have nothing to sell, right?
You're
And
right.
so, and show and appreciate and have that gratitude there. So as we finish up this conversation, what did I miss, or what did we not talk about that you would like to share with the audience?
I don't know. I can't think of anything that just comes to mind immediately that we missed. I think more than anything, just reinforcing. So, here's something I would love to share. I can't remember that. Actually, I think I shared this stat with you a couple of months ago, but HR roles are expected to grow. I want to say 8% is what's coming to mind. And that
Yeah.
sounds really, to
Yeah. Sort of
sound
labor and
really.
statistics. It's something like 8%. That's right.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, like, enrollment in HR management, HR majors have declined, but it's actually a profession that is expected to grow over the next decade. And so, the other thing I'll say is that from an HR perspective, you will never ever not be needed.
Wow.
You will never not be needed. And
No.
so, some people are more risk takers, some are more risk adverse. And so I think there's a place for both of those. Risk takers, like, you get an opportunity to really change the story and continue to be a part of the story of HR. And those that may be a little more risk adverse when they're thinking about career and what that more stable, stable pathway, HR is not ever going to go away, because people are never going to go away. So, I would like to see us start to close the gap and get our enrollment and across the country. It's not just a Virginia Tech, like, ours is strong, right? It's a national trend, but the need for HR professionals is going the other direction. And so, like, if we could get those two things in better alignment, I think we'd be doing a lot better off.
Yeah. We got to get that branding story and then sort of, yeah, debunk some of these myths. So, well, Wendy, thank you so much. I know
Absolutely.
you are a busy, busy person and a wonderful, wonderful guest. And thanks for taking time today to be a part of the conversation.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Great stuff.